Greetings. So here's part 3. What to do with plugins that you're using as you're mastering. I'm going to go back to the same 2 files that I used in part 2. They came in a little too hot, remember, but I'm going to stick with them because I just want to show you a few things with the C6 and some other plugins. A few of you might have Isotope Ozone, which is their mastering suite of plugins, and I'm going to show you that as well. But let's start with the C6. So let's get right to it, get to this particular track, and we're going to look at mastering tutorial 1, where, there were some peak moments that I said with the U-lean meter, it was a little too hot, but I'm going to bring up the U-lean meter and notice that it's after the C6. The C6 in the last demo was bypassed, but it was there, and it's bypassed because you can tell it's dark blue. If I hold down Control, or that's the Start key on a PC, and I click it, it's going to unbypass it, so it will not be bypassed anymore. And let's bring that one up as well. So in case you didn't know, you actually can bring up multiple plugins and look at their windows. If you deselect this little target button, see the little red target button? If I leave that and then I bring up the U-lean, I actually have both plugins now live and visual to you. So I'm going to bring these down here. You're going to see the U-lean meter on the right and the C6 on the left. The C6 is actually first in the chain of inserts on the master. That will be affecting the sound of the master. The U-lean is not affecting the sound of the master at all. It is merely monitoring the loudness via the metering system in the U-lean loudness meter 2, free, that everyone's been given the download to. All right, so I'm going to continue this bypass and just let you hear a little bit. I'm going to show you using the C6, but it's on stations 1 through 11. It's a Waves plugin. It's a 6-band, multi-band compressor. And I want to show you a few of the features on it as we listen to it. So we're going to just play this part from here.
1, 2,
and now I'm going to hit the bypass button.
won't you scream with me?
Play the same part.
1, 2, 3.
A little more clarity.
Won't you scream with me?
Definitely louder. You can see on the
Shout,
U-lean,
sister, shout, yeah.
we're getting closer. This is average still, but we're still getting closer to 0.
Say your blazer.
Here comes the bypass.
Time.
That's the quieter sound. You can see the meters changing.
Sister Rosetta, shouts
Now,
of God.
here's where we can solo the bit that I have set up here for frequency. That's where some of the peak moments are happening. I'm going to solo the mids. This is where things can get kind of muddy. So I have that down a few dB below 0. Now one thing we can't do in mastering is bring out the sound of the solo that should be louder right here. It's not something you can do. You can't take a moment in the mix that should be a little bit louder and bring out a solo moment. You can try your best to carve out frequencies where that sizzling solo is happening and make that stand out a little bit more, but it's going to sound a little strange when you do that because you're going to have to bring down other frequencies. So for it to sound like a full mastered track, you really can't remix in mastering. All you can do is try and make things sound a little bit better in terms of which of the frequencies are too strident and too bright that I want to bring down, and which of the frequencies I don't hear enough that I'd like to bring up. And that's how you can do that with this multi-band compressor. So let's try and play around with the bands of the multi-band compressor and also see what happens when we push things up and pull things down, just to get an idea of what's happening here. Now notice my makeup gain is at 4.9. It's above 0 because that's what happens when you're using a compressor. The output is not like a master fader output. It's the output of taking everything that's been compressed and pushed down and made quieter to match the quiet parts, and then you bring the overall level of whatever you've reduced in the compressor up to an optimized level so that you're getting louder. Because in this case, we're trying to get closer to 0 as we are mastering. Remember, when our levels are -12, -9, those are all quieter. And the closer we get to 0, -9, -8, -7, -5, -4, you're getting closer to louder, which is the loudest level being 0 dB, and dBu if we were using analog, and dB full scale, which is when we're in the digital realm. Okay, so let's go back to this. We're going to play around with this a little bit. That's pushing the upper end up. When we pull it down, it sounds like we're pushing it under a pillow, right? It's too muted. That's because the band is really wide here. We have a super wide band. So I could pull this band in so it's a little more narrow in this cross band here. And now I'm going to control a more narrow band of the frequencies. That's the idea that I'm trying to do here. Also, we have our Q. You guys see this Q here? The Q is the quality of the bandwidth. How wide or narrow that Q is has to do also with how much of the narrow band of frequency that I'm dealing with. So let's go back and listen to this loud part right here. Okay. I'm going to play the same part, muted. Bypass. Not as clear, right? Just because I've got some of the frequencies of the mids pushed up and some of them are mitigated for the peak moment.
Sister Rosetta shouts of God.
All right, the idea here is I am trying to find a happy medium between the louder strident part that's making the decibel levels go up. And in this case, I'm trying to get to 0 because I'm mastering at this point. I'm not trying to create a file for someone to master. I'm the mastering engineer at this point trying to, and by the way, I'm not a mastering engineer, but I'm just trying to show you that this art form of mastering is a very difficult type of engineering, and it's very particular, and people who do it spend years and years perfecting this particular skill. So, keep playing this part. See my range? You got purple moving? That's all just the most hissy parts, way up there beyond 8K. There's one of the parts I'm trying to mitigate right there. That's where the most of those hits, those peak moments are. So I'm taking that particular one down a bit. That's the muddy part. That's that whole muddy mid-range, which is, you know, see? You can run your plugins too hot. So I'm reducing the mids, boosting a little bit of the highs around the strident part. And I know you're like, what on earth? Why does she keep playing that part over? You have to keep playing the parts that are strident to kind of listen and compare and figure out what it is that you're trying to work with here. What we're trying to do is mitigate the one section of the upper mids that are pushing our levels really hot, and make that the compression moment, as opposed to compressing the entire song, everything in the song, bringing all of it down.
So let's hear what this sounds like from this point on.
Won't you scream with me?
Too hot right there. You guys see that?
Shout, sister, shout, yeah.
So, probably got to bring
this
is our moment with the strident bit. What happens when we push the mids up? Low mids. You get more bass. That's the original that we started with. You're trying to get more clarity, more punch, and you're trying to get as close to 0 as possible. More clarity, more punch, and as close to 0 as possible. That's what you're doing when you're mastering. Notice we're getting within 0.3 dB. This is, it's no longer the file you're seeing here. Now it's what we're sending out our master fader. So I deselected the reds because that was from when I pushed it up. These little peak meters on the master fader here. These will stay there. They'll stay lit until you deselect them. Click on them to make them go away because you always want them to pop.
Won't you scream with me?
We're within half a dB, basically, like 0.1. And at that moment, it gets too loud. So that's a moment where it's going over. It's gonna hit over, and that's that peak moment right there where it's too much. It's hitting just over from the way we're pushing it with the C6. You see it's gone into the red. I don't want that to happen. You don't want any of it to go into the red. So I can't change my meter. The metering is just there to show us what's going on, but I need to change the C6. And maybe I've pushed something up a little too hot on the upper end here. You could also potentially reduce a little bit of the output gain just by a dB. And let's see if the same thing happens. I need to bring back the two, deselect this so I can see them both at the same time. It's our little target button. It says, hey, target this one plugin only. But when I deselect it, it says, leave that up and put up the other one as well. So now we can see both of them. I'm going to bring them down here. And so you can see both. Let's try that peak moment again.
1, 2,
we're at 0.
3. Won't you scream with?
Mastering engineers love that.
Shout, sister, shout, yeah.
We are seeing a bit there, so let's try it again. I want to see if we're hitting the plug-in. I do not want to hit the red.
1, 2, 3. Won't you
I'm looking
scream with?
where it hits. Yeah, that was the leftover from another time.
Shout, sister, shout, yeah.
Okay, let's listen to it without the plug-in, without the C6.
1, 2,
wow,
3.
Totally different.
Won't you scream with me? Shout.
Sounds like it's under a pillow. I'm not even using an EQ, and I don't know that I even need to on this. Now, try it again.
1, 2, 3. Won't you scream with me?
I'm getting super close to my peak moment. Notice how I clicked the true peak max just to click it to make sure I'm getting a proper reading, not something that happened before. It'll hold on to what happened previous.
Won't you scream with me?
Getting within 0.8.
Shout, sister, shout, yeah.
As you can see from this, I've pushed up some of the low end, which was not happening in the mix that we received. I've taken away a few dB from the mid-range, that muddy mid. I've pushed up a little bit of upper frequencies, but I've made sure that in that 4K, that 3K to 5K range where it's really strident, I've actually pulled that down. That's what you see in this one here. See in the 5K here. That's what's been pulled down just a bit. Our range is -12. So let's listen again and watch this.
1,
Moving, right? It's mitigating. That's what's bringing you down. This is what's being reduced right now as you watch it.
Shout, sister, shout, yeah.
This is what is actively being
dynamically ranged corrected in this multiband compressor. Okay, why did I keep the loudness meter on? Because I wanted to see, to make sure I wasn't going to hit over 0. And you can see by these red dots, we did not get there. We're getting close at different times, but we're not there. We're not looking at the visual of the waveform. This meter is reading what is happening at the compressor here, the multiband compressor, and what is going through our master fader at 0. Do not ever reduce the level of your master fader. Leave it at 0 at all times. The master fader when you do your bounce, and the master fader as what you're listening to through your audio interface, has got to be at unity gain for you to have any kind of accurate reading. Okay, I gave a little bit on the C6. I also want to show you what would happen if I took away the C6 and I added Ozone. So I'm going to use the same insert, multi-channel. I'm just going to replace it with isotope, and I'm going to go with Ozone. I have many versions of the Ozone, but I want Ozone Master Rebalance, Ozone 9 Pro. Okay, so this is just going to bring up a totally different plugin for you to check out what happens when I'm using something like this. So notice this is saying vocals, bass. I'm not trying to change anything in any one of these, but I just wanted to show you like what it'll do. You sing with me. It doesn't sound right, does it? Why? Because it's vocals. 1, 2, there's the setting for bass. Want you to scream with me. There's a setting for drums. Now, let's try Ozone 9 in general as the plugin. Let's try Ozone 9, just the stereo, which is going to give you the whole full complement of what's available in Ozone, which is a mastering suite of plugins. You've got an equalizer, maximizer, which is like a limiter, and let's take a look at what this does with our presets. So if I go to presets first, I'm going to bring these over here. All-purpose mastering, that's what I'm kind of looking for here. So analog dreams, analog buddy, added warmth. You don't know what any of this is until you hear it. So I'm going bright and wide. I just want to see what it does. Let's see what happens when we go bright and wide. It's showing us a real-time analyzer. This is a real-time analyzer that's showing you the most loudest and most outgoing of the frequencies. So I can take any of these, pull some of these things down, push them up. I hit bypass, and bypassed. Try the maximizer. There's our true peak again. We want our true peak here. I'm going to just play with a few of these. Transient hits, transient emphasis. And this is where I'm going to start pushing up my levels. Remember, I'm trying to get closer to 0. That's not too much. I'm going to move up my threshold a little bit. Let's try it without it. So in mastering, you're trying to bring the overall levels up. You got to reduce all these little red buttons here. You got to remove them so that you can see where the peak moments have happened. So it's telling you, here's my ceiling. I need you to let me know when it's at -0.3. It's not.
She was a pint-sized girl. So let's go to these loud parts over here again.
Shout, yeah. Shout, sister, shout, yeah. Shout, sister, shout, yeah. Shout, sister, shout.
Let's try it in the middle. Just kind of
push it away.
Fast. So what am I showing you in the Ozone? Many people have purchased the iZotope Ozone series, which is a all-in-one mastering plugin, and you can see it's got kind of similar to, you know, how the Sheps has inserts that you can insert various processors in the rack. This is similar. There's a dynamic EQ. There's an imager, which is the stereo width of your image, how wide and deep your image is in terms of your listening to your left and right, and also the depth, and a maximizer, which is a limiter. And this is used on for various output modes that you need to use for mastering. And then you can also add more things to it. You can add an exciter, master rebalance, any of those number of things that I was able to insert on their own, but I didn't. I wanted to choose the overall Ozone 9. So this is the bright and wide, but what if I chose a different adaptive dynamics? So let's see what this looks like. The adaptive dynamics. If I play this one.
Will take a push it away.
Still kind of strident, and it's hitting a little too hard. Bypass. So there's a limiter on it. It's got a tap, release.
She was born on grounds until it got what follow, yeah.
You can see how you can change any one of these in the moment.
She was a pint-sized girl, fingers full of spirit and God gave the gift so everyone
can
hear her. Rocks picked her up, top the piano so everyone can watch her play.
So this would be like saying all bands, all controls, swinging band line.
Shaking the earth, started quaking, and the instruments about to go down.
See how it changes?
She rocked the reel, took that shot, they had it home, then they put the fire out, 'cause the room started burning, everybody singing shout.
All right, so in this one, what you see is we're pushing it too hard on this section here because we're hitting the red, right? So we need to change that. We also need to make the maximizer not have true peak at 0.1, but 0.3 is a little bit safer. And let's hear what it sounds like when we do that. Hit the red. Let's go to a loud part. Again, always check your loud part. I hear it hitting. And again, it's in that strident area. So when you're using something like Ozone, you've got to really work this plugin a little bit in terms of figuring where things are happening and how you're going to make changes. The C6 was a little easier because we could actually bring it up and say, oh, there's where the strident part is. I'm going to reduce the dynamic range of the strident part. This plugin has three things going on. It has the adaptive dynamics processor, it has a stereo imager, and a limiter, which they call their maximizer, right? That's basically a limiter. It also has the ability to solo things, so let's listen. So it's bypassing everything other than the imager. Just the maximizer with dynamics. So you're able to check out, just like in the others, where you want to solo what each of the things in the rack is doing, when you're trying to figure out what these various things are doing. You're able to solo them without hearing the others. It kind of mutes the others. Do I find this one helpful? For me, no. For me, I'm not a mastering engineer, but I would rather have control over individual plugins when I'm trying to figure out what's going on in a mastering session.
And I don't put myself out there as a mastering engineer. It's not my forte. It's not what I know. I know how to mix. I'm a mix engineer. And you can't just say, oh, I'm going to learn how to master and be a mastering engineer. It definitely takes a long time. And what I want to point out to you all is that this project is not meant for you to pull your hair out and try and figure out what am I going to do with this project. I don't know what I'm doing with mastering. You don't know what you're doing. And the idea is that you're just playing around with it. One of the things is the takeaway is I want you to see how hard it is to master. That it really does take a professional that knows compression, equalization, and knows how to use their tools. You're just playing around with a few tools to see if you can make someone's stereo file sound better. In some cases you can, because you're going to make it louder, but that doesn't mean you're actually also applying the proper equalization that needs to occur so that the right frequencies are hitting our ears in all the different ways we listen, whether we're wearing AirPods, any kind of little in-ear type of monitoring systems, over the ear type monitoring that I'm using. I'm using an open ear pair of headphones. It should sound good with a closed ear pair of headphones. Monitors, studio monitors, or home speakers. That's what the mastering engineer is trying to do, is get it to sound good in everything. It's quite a feat. Anyway, the idea here on this project is that you don't take beyond you don't take more than an hour just playing around with this and trying to find something that works. Trying to find my share. You might have wondered, where's she going? I couldn't find my stop share. Anyway, the idea is playing around with it just to get a feel for it, just to get an idea of how all this works. And there's various plugins that you can use. If you don't have the C6, you all have access to stations 1 through 11, so you can use the C6 and play around with it. But if you're using a regular compressor, a regular plugin, you're going to find that you're compressing overall the whole dynamic range of the whole song, but it's not going to make it sound so great. You might get more volume out of it, but you're not going to pull out the pieces of the song that are too loud in certain frequency moments. And that's what a multiband compressor can do for you. Okay?